Hi, I'm Steve Golub. This is the second in a series of 3 videos about legal empowerment. In this one, I'm going to talk about how legal empowerment operates. Now, in a sense, I'm not going to do legal empowerment complete justice, if you will, in that it's such a diverse array of activities and strategies involving so many issues and partner populations. However, I'm going to do my best, starting with providing some very generic examples of legal empowerment work, and then moving into some key features of legal empowerment activities and how it operates. Okay, so let's talk about some very general examples of legal empowerment in action. Well, one leading example that you find in many countries is where a farmers association may help its members gain greater control over their land, thus increasing their incomes. How does it do so? A variety of strategies, but it often features paralegals, non-lawyers, sometimes the farmers themselves, who come from the very communities they serve and who help their fellow farmers learn about and take advantage of favorable land titling laws. We also find legal empowerment in action when a local women's group may help the women in the area who are victimized by domestic violence or who want to support their neighbors to organize around the issue. They may use law, they may use other forms of advocacy, but in doing so, they may persuade the police to take the issue more seriously. Now, how do they do so, given that the police often view domestic violence as just a fact of life? They may get lawyers involved. The women may work with lawyers who may take certain cases to court, creating pressure on the police and, of course, on the perpetrators of the violence. But sometimes it's a more informal kind of negotiation, with the group gradually persuading the police to take the issues more seriously, exerting some pressure on them, sometimes in a friendly way, and sometimes persuading them just to take down a record of reports of abuse so that in the future men know that the police are watching them. Another example involves the issue of legal identity. In many countries across the world, because people have come in from another country, because they may not have their births registered in a hospital, they don't have what's called legal identity. And that's more than just a matter of paperwork. It involves they're losing the right to education. They're losing the right to other health services or other government services. They're losing the very notion of citizenship, even if they should be entitled to it. So mothers and fathers equipped with knowledge of legal identity and what it can be as a problem can often, on their own, when properly educated, go to the relevant government office to register births, to make sure their children get those benefits down the line. And of course, sometimes with the help of paralegals or helpful groups, they're able to do this as well. We also find market vendors negotiating with government officials on a local level to make sure that they have the right to sell their goods in a public market or sometimes even on the street. Why is this important? Because often local officials or police may harass them to stop them from selling their wares, which obviously destroys their incomes. Or as an alternative, these officials or police may try to extract bribes from them in order to make some money on the side from what vendors should be allowed to do perfectly legally. How do these market vendors go about getting these rights? Well, often it involves forming a vendors association, becoming aware of what they may be entitled to and how they can persuade local government officials to honor their requests, be it through political or legal or other kinds of pressure and influence. In many countries across the world, particularly in rural areas, non-governmental groups are helping to modify traditional justice systems. Why are they trying to modify or sometimes monitor them or sometimes create alternatives to them? Well, on the one hand, traditional justice systems are the main way that people access justice. On the other hand, these traditional justice systems can be unfair in all sorts of ways, sometimes corrupt, sometimes biased in favor of the rich. Certainly that can be a problem, and frequently, even typically, biased against women. So how do these non-governmental groups try to go about changing or modifying these systems over time? It's not as though they change them automatically overnight, but through trying to educate people in these systems, by trying to get women more involved in what is a male-dominated process, educating them about the law in particular, other devices such as building on the influence that NGOs may have have, by virtue of doing other work in the community, literacy, livelihood development, they gradually make inroads to make these systems more gender-friendly. There's a lot of work to do, but there's some signs of progress along the way. In other instances, prisoners are thrown into jail and the key is thrown away. That's a fact of life in many countries. We see paralegals in some countries trying to help the prisoners and experiencing some success in helping them with this problem of pretrial detention, where they're held for years without ever coming to trial. Legal empowerment also involves what's often called public interest law or public interest litigation. There are many instances in which groups that are victimized or discriminated against or otherwise suffer under the burdens of poverty are helped by taking cases to court to help them regarding health issues, regarding housing issues, a whole slew of issues that through which the courts help vindicate their rights. Finally, one more example I want to provide is that of the interface of legal empowerment and public health. We are seeing examples where people are informed of and enabled to act on their rights to certain basic services, such as medicine, such as getting basic medical care. And they do so because they're able to know what they're entitled to from government dispensaries or from other medical outlets. Now I'm going to talk about a few key concepts, a few key roles that people play in how legal empowerment operates. You heard me mention paralegals a couple of times. Let me expand on that concept because it really is an area that is getting a lot more attention in international development, and justifiably so. As I'd mentioned before, a paralegal is a non-lawyer who's developed some special skills and expertise that enables him or her to help people with their legal problems. There are basically two kinds of paralegals. One might be considered a professional paralegal, employed by a government or very often by an NGO, a non-governmental organization, who gets a salary to actually go into communities, work with the poor or disadvantaged in various ways, and help them in a whole variety of ways. These professional paralegals are helping people out even if they're not from the very groups they serve. In contrast, the other big category of paralegals might be considered volunteer paralegals. They typically come from the farmers' organizations or the fishing communities or the women's groups who they work with and help out. They may get some minimal compensation in terms of covering their expenses for travel and the like, but they're basically there as volunteers within their communities. Now, how do paralegals operate? In all sorts of ways, but one way is sometimes to help their fellow farmers or other fellow citizens steer their applications through various administrative processes. Land titling is a perfect case in point. Sometimes they're involved in more informal ways in the community, helping to mediate disputes within a group, within a community, or acting on behalf of a community as a whole. Those are just a couple of examples of how they operate. But why are paralegals important? Why are they getting increasing attention? And why are they expanding presence in international efforts to help the disadvantaged act on their rights? Well, one issue is that often they're there when there are no lawyers. Paralegals may be in rural areas, in small towns, in poor communities where lawyers simply aren't present. And in some countries, there are very few lawyers to go around. By virtue of conflicts, by virtue of the nature of the legal culture there aren't that many lawyers to begin with. So often paralegals are in place doing things that lawyers would otherwise do, and often doing it as well. Another big reason why paralegals are important is because they're cost effective. Everyone in the international development field says sustainability, 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 because they really believe that things have to be low cost in order to keep going, in order for services to keep being provided. Paralegals are a real case in point. They're doing the work often as well as lawyers and at a much lower cost. If they're professional paralegals, their salaries are much lower. If they're volunteers, their costs are virtually non-existent. So paralegals are often more cost effective. Finally, there's another reason why paralegals are important. Sometimes they may even be more effective than lawyers in certain key respects. That's not to say that they necessarily know more about the law than lawyers do, although I have been in meetings where paralegals are pretty good at delving into the details of environmental or agrarian law or laws pertaining to fisheries. But even if they don't have quite the same degree of legal skills and knowledge as lawyers, they're from the communities, so they know the people and their problems better. Or they work a lot in the communities, so they're more in touch with the needs there. They often are speaking the same language as the people from the groups they serve, either literally, in that sometimes there are different languages spoken in a given country. A lawyer may not speak the same language as a community he or she is working with, or because paralegals speak more of a common language rather than the legalese that lawyers tend to delve into. So in those respects, they can even be more effective than attorneys. There's one other respect which reluctantly I have to flag, that sometimes people just don't trust lawyers, either justly or unjustly. Sometimes justly, though, because a lot of poor people in a lot of countries have had bad experiences with handing over money to lawyers and not getting any service in return. Paralegals may not be perfect. There are paralegals who don't do their jobs well, but generally, by virtue of their orientation, they're being more rooted in and working more closely with communities. They are often more trustworthy, or at least people consider them that way. So cost effectiveness, absolute effectiveness, being where lawyers aren't, those are some of the advantages of paralegals and why they're important, an important development in international development and law. Now, none of this is to say that lawyers don't have an important role in all sorts of legal empowerment work, starting with paralegals themselves. But often they're better as backup roles to paralegals. They may train them. They may provide ongoing advice to them. They may step in when a case needs to go to court or when it needs to be escalated up to a higher level of government. But as a matter of cost effectiveness and sometimes absolute effectiveness, lawyers are better at playing that backup role. They're really valuable in that respect. One thing they do that I want to emphasize is that in good paralegal programs, lawyers are there for ongoing consultations. Look, for all of us, we learn on the job, and that applies to paralegals also. There's a concept that you do paralegal training for a couple of days or a couple of months or even longer, and perhaps they know all they need to know. But we all know better than that. When lawyers are present to answer new questions, to clarify new points of law, that's a very, very valuable point, a very valuable aspect of paralegal programs. Sometimes the lawyers may be working for the very same NGOs as a professional paralegal is. Sometimes they may have more of a partnership relationship, more informal, with volunteer paralegals. In any event, they're part of the paralegal picture, an important part, but often in this backup role that I'm emphasizing. And of course, lawyers do so much more. But this is the kind of work you're familiar with to a good extent. They may be involved in taking individual cases to court, representing indigent defendants. They may be involved in public interest litigation or in lobbying and advocating before legislatures, things I've touched on. In some countries, however, they're also involved with organizing, with providing backup where people demonstrate against unjust situations or people are demonstrating to get their rights vindicated. I don't want to make it seem like legal empowerment is mainly about demonstrations. It's not. But lawyers often play a role in assisting those, in organizing people, in helping out in ways that are not strictly about legal practice as we understand it in a conventional sense, but this broader political sense that is sometimes called alternative or developmental lawyering. Finally, I want to emphasize the roles of all sorts of people involved with legal empowerment who are neither paralegals nor lawyers. There is, of course, the poor and disadvantaged themselves. They play a big role even if they don't have that specialized training of paralegals. In some cases, they're more passive. In some cases, they're more active. But where they get some knowledge of the law, they're often able to act on it, often in combination with where being organized or otherwise assisted. But even moving beyond the poor poor and the disadvantaged themselves. There are all sorts of other folks involved in legal empowerment work. They may be specialists on gender. They may be social workers. They may even be progressive religious leaders. Sometimes they're all progressive or helpful government officials. They can very much be a part of the legal empowerment picture. And often these other individuals are very instrumental in integrating the use of law with other development efforts. I mentioned traditional justice systems before. Well, sometimes the best efforts to modify traditional justice systems involve building on legal literacy work, community development work, efforts to improve people's livelihoods that are carried out by non-lawyers and people who aren't paralegals. So there's integration that goes on the part of many other professionals, many other people with many other backgrounds that can make legal empowerment effective. That integration of other kinds of development work, other kinds of political advocacy with the use of law is something that I'm going to get more into in the third and closing video in this series. So we've seen how legal empowerment involves paralegals, how it of course involves lawyers, how it involves people with other skills and backgrounds, and very fundamentally how it involves the poor and disadvantaged themselves. In the next video, we're going to look at why legal empowerment is important and how it's increasingly integrated with other development fields. Thanks for watching.